Now, the national transmission system, NTS, changes in our network code, transmission network code, TNC, and changes in tariffs for access to infrastructure. Stanisław Brzęczkowski, Chief Engineer, Gas Market Development Division, GAZ-SYSTEM.
Dzień dobry. Ktoś kiedyś powiedział, że jak
Good morning, Lei. A year without a change in the TNC is a lost year. Wow. So we need to change to have yet another amendment. Why do we have this amendment? Well, biomethane is no longer a yeti. We've been talking about it, but nobody has ever seen it. But now, reading papers and publications, we can see biomethane is here. So we need to catch up with the reality, or maybe create the reality. And if you open this document, TNC, and some of you must have read it a couple of times, there is always some room for improvement. So since we are opening our TNC transmission network code, we've tried to make some positive amendments. Biomethane market development, it's a challenge. It's CH4, the same methane, and so how to differentiate between those produced in various manners. So the major difference here are documents, papers. Those molecules tend to have the IDs, and if those IDs, if we talk about IDs, they need to be issued by someone. Showed at borders. We have the Schengen zone with Lithuania, but from the perspective of biomethane, a border is a border. The same applies to other countries. That's why the exchange of information, informing us that in a certain quantities transmitted via the interconnectors or in domestic systems, we need to know that in those quantities of gas there is certain share of a green element. We also admit suggestions from you that the biomethane plant, for instance, is too far away from the system, so maybe we should transport it with tank trucks in a compressed form. We welcome such solutions as well. That is why, if you want to show your biomethane ID, first we need to know whether you are certified. Well, biomethane means a lot of challenges, biotechnological, but also legally. So far, we've had the energy law, a couple of regulations, a couple of EU codes. Biomethane is subject to regulation in at least 3 laws, 3 acts, apart from the energy law, where biomethane is considered as a gaseous fuel. We have the RES Act, which tells us a lot about the requirements from producers. But we also have some other rules in the Law Act on biofuels and biocomponents. Why so? It's not up to me to judge, but finding all the biomethane-related regulations is pretty complex. What else? What's more, we also have a system of proofs of sustainability. That is why we are going to hear more, not only about the product, but also the entities transmitting that product. So a shipper wishing to transmit biomethane needs to prove that they are in the system of sustainable development value chain, that it's one of the entities belonging there, sustainable development value chain. Yes, that's what we need to do indeed, to check. Those certificates are pretty complex, but for those entities, we just want a couple of pieces of information. Certificate number, its validity, and the name of the recognized certification system. In Europe, there are 3 or 4 of certificate issuing systems. I will not offer their names. So they are approved by the European Commission as those issuing proper certificates. Another important element, another Yeti, EU database for biofuels. This database possibly exists for gaseous fuels, liquid fuels, and we hear on and on that it's going to be available for biogas fuels, but we only hear about it. There are stories, there are presentations, there are workshops related to the topic, but for the time being, it's all in construction. So it's good that we are just starting with biomethane. And now let's move forward to yet another challenge. If we talk about biomethane, and if it's a good biomethane, we have actually 2 documents, Guarantee of Origin, which are perfectly described in the ARIAS Act, but once this gas is produced and stays in the system, there is some division which appears. I mean, the gas flows via the system, whereas the guarantees of origin are separate from it. So the guarantees of origin do not prove that it's really biomethane that's transmitted. The document that really proves it is the proof. Is a proof, and in practice, this document is named fourfold. It can be called sustainability certificate in some of EU regulation. There is also a name like proof of sustainability, and people who talk about biomethane frequently mention GOSs and POSs. So, in line with the law, it's a proof. It's not a certificate. And this document, the proof, follows the molecule, follows the element, proving that it's really green. And it would be good if that were enough, but this proof of sustainability is a lengthy document. But actually, we are just interested in a couple of elements. Because of various regulations that bind us, we will ask you to provide us with basic information. Number, place and time of issuance, number or the volume subject to the POS, being like the quantity of energy, and the total value of greenhouse gas emissions. And this element is important because if those emissions are low, it can be treated as the clearing mechanism for ETS. Yeah, frequently you repeat you are interested in biomethane in order to avoid greenhouse emission charges. For us, it's also of importance because the emission ratios and emission factors are calculated differently in our case. We need that information at physical entry and exit points. At some points, the capacity charges are going to be reduced if there is some quantity of biomethane. At entry points from biomethane production, if we have the POS 100% capacity discount is granted. That's why we need all that information at the entry point. We even need that information there is no discount involved, because the revenues resulting from transmitting balanced low-emission gaseous fuels is considered as taxonomic revenue, which then translates into our ESG ratios. That's why at those physical points we need all that information, because that's where the capacity allocation takes place. To continue the subject on points, storage facility, entry and exit points, and that's also related to discounts. But not for every single type of biomethane, but in our case for biomethane produced, generated in Poland. That is why the information on the place of production is of importance. Another element related to biomethane, a lot has been said about vessels. But for biomethane, based on our experience and experience for our colleagues from Lithuania, we think about delivering biomethane to pipes via with tracks, tank tracks. Then it's ESG. But how to name those points? Collective point, but collective points sometimes are understood in a broader manner than just reloading from tank tracks to the network. And we do not want to limit ourselves to biomethane only. E-methane will follow other gases maybe in the future. That's why we have gaseous fuels in the name. And that's how the gaseous fuel reloading unit, reloading installation was created. IPPG, gaseous fuel reloading installation, IPPG. We hope the solution will translate into accelerating the speed of biomethane adoption. This IPPG is a challenge because it's all truck transported, whereas you are used to the situation when you have capacities and quantities per hour. In here we have tank trucks, and it's like by waves, by shifts. Our aspiration is to operate such points as well. However, we are constrained by the regulator. So for the time being, it's not us. A couple of entities have already decided to collaborate with us. That's why we presented some rules for connection. Entry point from IPPG, an entity to operate this IPPG will buy capacity into the transmission system, but entities delivering gas there, the shippers, will get the transmission ability allocation. Because of certain complications, we do not want to have nominations at those points, but the operator will know who has delivered how much. That's why only allocation in place there. the operator will offer us the daily quantities. We'll have the whole body of information necessary for balancing, but as an operator, we will not think or analyze the timing and the frequency of tank trucks' arrival, etc. As for biomethane, that's it. If you have a look at the TNC, you always spot something of interest, something to amend. And that is why we focus on the pre-connection agreements. 2 safety mechanisms added. This pre-connection agreement should, at a certain point of time, should be transformed into the connection agreement, connection contract. But it doesn't always happen that way. That's why those 2 suggestions. If the connection agreement is there to be signed, we would like you to sign it and to get connected. If not, the pre-connection agreement makes no sense. So an entity having a pre-connection agreement gets some time to sign the connection agreement, and this time has been defined. If elapsed, then we part. Another element referring to the connection aspect, information on connection possibility. In the regulation, you can read that if an entity has no title for location where it wants to get connected, then it gets the information only. On our website, we immediately enable the interested party to apply for pure information only rather than connection conditions. Transmission contracts. It's like a short update. If you contract a framework, if you conclude a framework transmission contract, that's when we want to submit power of attorney for the internal administrator of the information exchange system. That's this internal person within a company able to offer further permits or access rights to other employees. So power of attorney for the internal administrator. Once you have this internal administrator, you have a contact point to manage the rights, etc. Capacity allocation procedure. A lot of changes, but none of them substantive. This item was subject to a number of improvements. It ended up with somehow chaotic wording. So it's really colorful, that page, with a lot of changes, but none of them really substantive. Technological development. That's another aspect. 2 years ago, I was mentioning commissioning mechanism. We started with the end users, and now a request for sources. And since we are going to have new sources, in the case of biomethane, we need to add this element. And another element, forecast for capacity allocation. we keep it at the quarterly level. But we offer a stricter definition, a stricter working. If certain forecast is applied for, it's kept unchanged within a specific period of time as defined in the wording. You can change the forecast downward. You have this right, although you are not encouraged to do so. But sometimes entities wanted to change their capacity allocation, but they couldn't reduce their forecast, and it was like an offside trap. So if for the next year you reduce your capacity allocation, then this forecast can be based on this new baseline rather than on the original baseline. And if for a certain quarter or month the forecast is approved, this value is considered like applicable for all subsequent quarters or months until the end of the period, unless you make a change. Because sometimes somebody submitted a forecast for one quarter and then did nothing for the months to follow and reduced the forecast for yet another quarter sometime later. We do not like such situations. Allocations. IPPG, the operator there, is responsible for the allocation here. A new element to test, we formalize the wording on allocation adjustment. If there is some major mistake, we want to have the allocation adjustment possibility, but only in very specific rare cases. Generally speaking, you know that last week we opened the consultation round. They continue until the end of October, waiting for your deep diving comments. I will also tackle the subject of tariffs, so TNC and tariffs combined. This process is of interest. It took several years. January this year, the Energy Regulatory Office approved the discount coefficients for products. Some changes, the entry from the LNG terminal to be reduced from 100% into 70% in 2026 and 40% for 2027. The nature of the system changed. Our internal demand also covers transmission, so the ERO president does not offer any seasonal coefficients. This year, still, every month we have a different coefficient. Now it's going to be simpler, just one coefficient. And due to those changes, starting from the next year, it's going to be cheaper. From 1.20 to 0.3, 0.4 in the transit, but also in the national system at the entry point, this rate is going to be lower. How does it translate into the regional traffic? In the next year, in 3 quarters, our products are going to be cheaper than this year, with an exception to the summer quarter. And consultation of the tariff methods. The consultation round is in progress and it will continue until the end of November. So you still have some time to read this document. It's a new method. We used to call it methodology. Now it's called the method, tariff calculation method. It is a twisted process, but I'm just a straightforward engineer. We offer our proposals. You make comments. Then we submit everything to the ERO, to ACER, and at the end of the day, the president of the Energy Regulatory Office, ERO, issues a document which is the guideline for tariffs in the years 2027, 2031. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Stanisław, for your presentation. And it's time to ask questions. Please use the menu. Hubert Jarosz, Orlen SA. A question that concerns the changes to the TNC and the tariff. As of the beginning of September, we have had consultations on the combined combination of the two systems, NTS and SGT. So can you present perhaps some roadmap for this process and what it's supposed to look like in the coming years? As the President said, he practically answered the question. It's the phase of tariff methodology, which is the greatest challenge in terms of logistics of the administrative process, because it comprises numerous stages, but the intention is to have a single entry point rate. It's still a draft, and only when we have a solid ground of the decision of a regulator, we are talking January 2027, and we expect this decision to take place early next year. So it has to happen before we prepare the tariff for 2027. So we'll have around a year or so to implement this idea. In the document about system settlements, it's called Polish transmission system. Then we will have a solid basis with that decision. You can expect further consultations of the TNC because this will involve certain changes. The fact that we are going to have a single high methane gas system. So the decision, then the tariff drafting, and in the meantime we'll have to revise the network code, the general terms and conditions. From your perspective, the tip of the iceberg, that is that a tariff decision, the consultations of the TNC, it's yet to be seen. We'll see how we'll get there, what route we are going to take. It will depend on our internal developments and the administrative route, but we are all confident that as of January 27, we are going to have a single transmission system. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we can see somebody waving a hand. Please use the microphone. That is, I represent the Polish gas distribution company. I'm interested in the changes to the provision regarding connection to the gas grid. So in 513, the entity seeking a connection to the transmission network has to have a legal title to use their property to the network or the facility, or the ownership title, they propose to change to this provision is that the entity has to have a legal title to use the facility where the connected equipment installations or networks are to be used. So to the facility where the network, this sounds strange to us, and we are also supposed to declare in 5226, a new clause, declaration of the entity whose installations or facilities are to be connected to the transmission system, declaration of having a legal title to the facility where the networks are to be used. So what it is supposed to achieve, this change, and what as the OSD are we supposed to what are we supposed to do in order to comply? Well, thank you for having the faith in me that I know all the provisions by heart. This is one of the provisions that has been drafted as a result of the review, and it's in fact a quote from the system regulation. The truth is that in your case, this means the network that is to be connected, so it's, of course, you have the legal title. So maybe the wording is weird. I do agree, fully agree with you, but it's probably the Ministry of Energy that should answer this question. We had a simpler provision, but somebody pointed out to us that it should be somehow aligned with the legislation, and that's why this wording has been used. Anyone would like to ask a question? Thank you very much, Stanisław.